Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most important topics for anyone studying the Indian economy, the Rangarajan Committee Report on Poverty. Now, if you're gearing up for competitive exams, you know this is absolutely crucial. So let's break it down and make it super clear.
All right, here's our game plan. We're going to start at the very beginning, how poverty estimation even began. Then, we'll look at the big shifts that came with the Lakdawala and Tendulkar committees. After that, we'll get into why the Rangarajan Committee was even needed and really dig into the nuts and bolts of its methodology. Of course, we have to compare its results with Tendulkar's, and we'll wrap it all up with a power-packed summary slide that's perfect for your last-minute revision.
So, let's kick things off by going back in time. We need to understand how India first started to put a number on poverty. This foundation is absolutely key to making sense of all the changes that came later.
This timeline really lays it all out for us, doesn't it? It all started back in '62 with a working group, but the real game changer was the Alagh Committee in '79, which set that famous calorie-based approach. Then, Lakdawala in '93 added some nuance with state-level lines. And then, things really sped up with two major reviews back-to-back, Tendulkar in 2005 and, the star of our show today, Rangarajan in 2014.
Okay, the one thing you absolutely have to grasp is this concept of the calorie norm. For decades, this was the bedrock of India's poverty line. The Alagh Committee was the one that first quantified it, 2,400 kilocalories a day for folks in rural areas and a bit less, 2,100, for urban areas, mainly because of different physical activity levels. This idea of a nutritional baseline is where our whole story begins.
All right, with that foundation set, let's see how this model started to get tweaked and then completely overhauled. These next two committees really set the stage for the Rangarajan report.
The big idea from the Lakdawala Committee was pretty simple but powerful. The cost of living isn't the same everywhere in India, right? So they introduced state-specific poverty lines. That was a huge step. They also made a really important technical call. They decided to rely purely on consumption data from the NSS, that's the National Sample Survey, instead of trying to adjust it with broader economic data from the NAS, or National Account Statistics.
And then came Tendulkar. And whoa, this was a massive shift. They did something pretty radical. They created a uniform all-India urban poverty basket and applied it to everyone, whether they lived in a village or a city. They also moved away from that direct calorie anchor and started using a different type of consumption data called mixed recall period, or MRP. It was a complete departure. And let me tell you, it was very, very controversial.
Now, for all of you studying for exams, here's a super simple trick to keep this timeline straight. Just remember the phrase, all lions tackle rabbits. That's Alagh, Lakdawala, Tendulkar, and Rangarajan. A neat little trick to lock in the order. So, as you can probably guess, the Tendulkar report sparked a huge debate. Many felt that the poverty line it set was just too low. The public pressure was intense, and it led the Planning Commission to set up a new expert group under Dr. C. Rangarajan, and they did it much faster than usual.
This quote from the Rangarajan report itself really hits the nail on the head. It tells you exactly why they were formed. There was this growing feeling that the old definition of poverty, just about bare survival, wasn't cutting it anymore for a modern aspirational India.
So what did the Rangarajan Committee do? Well, in many ways, it was a major course correction. They pretty much reversed several of Tendulkar's big changes. They went back to separate baskets for rural and urban areas. They brought back a direct link to nutrition, but made it much more comprehensive. And they used a dataset considered more accurate, the MMRP, or Modified Mixed Recall Period.
Okay, let's pop the hood and see exactly how the Rangarajan Committee built its new poverty line. Getting this process is so important for those tricky exam questions.
And hey, we've got another fantastic mnemonic for you, this one specifically for Rangarajan's approach. Just remember the word run. Why? Because he reverted to separate rural-urban baskets and used nutrient norms again. Simple, right? It's a great way to remember his two main departures from Tendulkar.
So here it is, a very systematic three-step process. First, they figured out the cost of a food basket that met requirements not just for calories, but for proteins and fats too. Then, they added a certain normative amount for essential non-food items, think clothing, rent, education. Finally, they looked at what people were actually spending on everything else and added that in.
And this table here shows just how comprehensive that nutritional base was. This is a really big deal. Previous committees pretty much only looked at calories. But Rangarajan's method brought in specific norms for proteins and fats, which gives you a much more holistic picture of what adequate nutrition actually looks like.
Okay, so we've seen the methodology, but what was the actual result? What did this new approach mean for the final poverty numbers? This is where the rubber really meets the road, looking at the data for 2011-12.
So, what did this new calculation spit out? Let's look at the numbers. For rural India, the committee set the new poverty line, that's the minimum monthly spending per person, at 972 rupees.
And for urban India, where things are obviously more expensive, the line was pushed up quite a bit, to 1,407 rupees per person per month.
Now, when you take these new, higher poverty lines and apply them to the entire country's population, what do you get? The resulting all-India poverty ratio came out to be 29.5%.
And what does that percentage actually mean in terms of people? It's a huge number. It meant that in 2011-12, an estimated 363 million Indians were living below this new, more generous poverty line.
This comparison table, well, it puts everything in stark relief. Just look at the differences. The Rangarajan lines are significantly higher than Tendulkar's for both rural and urban areas. And here's the bottom line. The all-India poverty ratio jumps from Tendulkar's 21.9% all the way up to 29.5%. That means nearly 93 million more people were now officially counted as poor under this new methodology.
Okay, let's bring it all home. We're going to consolidate everything onto one slide. This is your ultimate cheat sheet, with all the key facts and concepts you absolutely need to remember for your exams.
All right, focus in on this slide. First, the chronology. Remember ALTR, all lions tackle rabbits. Know the unique contribution of each. Alagh gave us the calorie norms. Lakdawala introduced state-specific lines. Tendulkar made that huge controversial shift to a uniform urban basket and used MRP data. Then Rangarajan came in and, remember our mnemonic, decided to run. He reverted to separate baskets and used nutrient norms again with the more precise MMRP data. And finally, lock in those key Rangarajan figures for 2011-12, the rural line of RS 972, the urban line of RS 1407, and that final poverty ratio of 29.5%, much, much higher than Tendulkar's 21.9%. And this leaves us with a final, really big question that's at the heart of this entire debate. As a country like India continues to grow and develop, should our definition of poverty stay fixed on just minimum survival needs? Or should it be a moving target, a relative measure that evolves to reflect what it truly means to participate in an increasingly prosperous society? That right there is the fundamental challenge for anyone trying to measure poverty today.